"You look tired, like my husband before he left." Young widow told the lonely CEO at the cafe window. The snow outside the cafe window fell in slow, tired spirals, as if the night itself had grown weary of holding the weight of so many unspoken lives. Inside, under the soft amber lights, two strangers sat only a few feet apart, each carrying a loneliness so heavy it had begun to show on their faces. One was a man in an expensive coat, untouched coffee growing cold before him, eyes fixed on nothing. The other was a young woman standing nearby, her hands trembling slightly as she worked, her gaze briefly resting on him with a look that came from deep pain rather than curiosity. Something unseen passed between them in that quiet moment, the kind of moment that changes lives without asking permission. If you believe that kindness still matters in a tired world, that broken people can meet at exactly the right moment, please take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about second chances and healing hearts. His name was Daniel Carter, a name known in boardrooms, business magazines, and glass towers across the United States. He was a CEO whose signature could move millions of dollars in seconds, yet tonight, he sat alone in a small corner cafe in a town no one in his world ever talked about. The city had grown too loud for him after the funeral, too full of well-meaning faces that did not understand silence. His marriage had ended not in anger, but in absence, the kind that hollows a person out slowly. His wife had walked away months earlier, leaving behind a quiet house and a man who no longer knew who he was without someone waiting for him at home. Work had become a refuge until even that felt empty, and so he drove until the roads blurred and stopped when his strength did. Across the room was Grace Miller, though few people knew her name well enough to use it. She was 27, a widow in a world that expected grief to have an expiration date. Her husband, Samuel, had been a mechanic with oil-stained hands and a gentle laugh that made everything feel survivable. He had died 2 winters ago in an accident on an icy highway, leaving Grace with memories she replayed like prayers and a life that no longer resembled the future they had planned. She worked at the cafe not because it was her dream, but because it kept the lights on and gave her something to do with her hands when the nights grew too quiet. Faith had carried her through the first year, but even faith grew heavy when carried alone. Grace noticed Daniel not because of his tailored suit or watch, but because of the way he stared at the window, shoulders slightly slumped, as if the world had finally asked more than he could give. It was a look she knew too well, one she had seen in her husband during the months before the accident, when exhaustion crept into his bones and hope became harder to reach. That recognition stirred something inside her, not romance or curiosity, but compassion born from shared pain. She had learned that grief could make strangers feel familiar, like members of the same unspoken club. Daniel, for his part, felt exposed sitting there, as if the snow and glass could not hide how lost he was. The cafe was warm, smelled of coffee and cinnamon, and yet he felt cold inside. He had come in seeking shelter from the storm, but what he truly needed was rest from the endless pressure to be strong, decisive, and untouchable. For years, he had been the man with answers, the one others leaned on. Tonight, there was no one to lean on him, and the emptiness pressed harder than any deadline ever had. As the evening wore on, the cafe slowly emptied. Chairs were stacked, lights dimmed slightly, and the snow outside thickened, muffling the world. Grace moved through her closing routine with practiced motions, wiping counters and refilling sugar jars. Her mind wandered, as it often did at this hour, drifting back to nights when Samuel would wait up for her, coffee reheated for the 3rd time, smiling as if she were the best part of his day. The ache was familiar, but tonight it softened into something gentler, as if memory itself had decided to be kind. Daniel noticed the quiet, the way the world seemed to shrink to that small room. He should have left, should have gone back to his hotel and prepared for another day of pretending he was fine. Instead, he stayed, drawn by a sense that leaving now would mean missing something important, though he did not know what. The silence was no longer empty, it felt shared, as if someone else understood it without words. When Grace finally finished and stood still for a moment, she looked at Daniel again. There was no fear in her expression, only a soft sadness that had learned how to survive. Something compelled her to acknowledge him, not as a customer or stranger, but as another soul worn thin by life. In that instant, both of them felt it, a subtle shift, like a door opening just enough to let light through. They did not speak much that night, and yet something changed. Daniel left the cafe feeling lighter than he had in months, though he could not explain why. Grace locked up and walked home under the snow, her steps slower, her heart strangely calm. She whispered a prayer of thanks for reasons she could not fully name, asking God to watch over the man with tired eyes and a heavy heart. Over the next few days, Daniel found himself returning to the cafe. At first, he told himself it was the quiet, the anonymity. But soon, he recognized the truth. It was Grace's presence, steady and unassuming, that drew him back. She did not treat him like someone important or broken, only like someone human. Her kindness was not loud or performative, it was woven into small gestures, into the way she remembered how he took his coffee, into the way she listened without trying to fix him. Grace, too, felt something stir within her, something she had not allowed herself to feel since Samuel's death. It was not betrayal or guilt, but the realization that her life was not over, that God had not abandoned her to a future defined only by loss. She struggled with the feeling, prayed through it, questioned it. Healing, she learned, did not erase love, it made room for it in new forms. Daniel began to open up, not about his wealth or success, but about the loneliness that followed him everywhere. He spoke of nights spent in empty houses, of achievements that no longer brought joy. Grace listened, understanding that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit they are tired. In return, she shared pieces of her own story, the pain of losing Samuel, the faith that had both carried and challenged her. Their connection grew slowly, like a sunrise rather than a lightning strike. There was no rush, no promises made too soon. Instead, there was patience, mutual respect, and a shared understanding that both of them were rebuilding from the ground up. Daniel found himself questioning the life he had built, wondering if success meant anything without someone to share the quiet moments. Grace found herself smiling more, feeling hope return in unexpected ways. Winter gave way to early spring, and with it came change. Daniel extended his stay, then quietly invested in the town, not for profit, but because he saw value in places that cared for people. He supported local businesses, including the cafe, ensuring it could stay open without losing its soul. Grace noticed the change not just in the town, but in herself. She felt stronger, more grounded, her faith deepening rather than fading. There were setbacks, moments when grief resurfaced or fear whispered that happiness was temporary. Grace sometimes dreamed of Samuel and woke with tears, questioning whether she was allowed to move forward. Daniel faced criticism from his world, colleagues who did not understand why he would slow down or change priorities. Yet each time doubt crept in, they found reassurance in quiet conversations, in shared prayers, in the simple act of being present. As the anniversary of Samuel's death approached, Grace struggled more than she expected. Daniel noticed, offering support without pressure. Together, they visited the small church where Grace still lit candles, where she found solace in familiar hymns and wooden pews worn smooth by generations of faith. Daniel, who had long considered himself spiritual but distant, felt something awaken there, a reminder that life was more than ambition and loss. That day marked a turning point. Grace realized that honoring her past did not mean closing herself off from the future. Daniel realized that love did not weaken him, it gave him strength he had never known. Their bond deepened, rooted not in need, but in choice, in the decision to walk forward together despite the scars they carried. As summer arrived, the cafe windows once again filled with light, no longer reflecting snow but warmth and life. Daniel no longer sat alone, and Grace no longer felt invisible. They did not claim perfection or promise fairy tales, but they built something real, grounded in compassion, faith, and the courage to begin again. If this story is touching something deep within you, if it reminds you of loss you have carried or hope you are still searching for, please take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel. The months that followed were not marked by grand announcements or sudden transformations, but by quiet miracles that only broken people truly notice. Life did not magically become easy for Daniel Carter or Grace Miller. Instead, it became honest. The kind of honesty that asks you to wake up every day and choose courage even when fear still lingers in the corners of your heart. The cafe that once served as a silent meeting place for grief slowly became a symbol of healing, not because it erased the past, but because it honored it. Daniel began attending church with Grace on Sundays, sitting in the back pew at first, uncomfortable yet curious. He had spent years believing control was the highest form of security, but the hymns reminded him how small and human he truly was. Grace watched him bow his head in prayer, her heart full in a way she never expected again. It wasn't romance that moved her, it was witnessing a man learning to surrender his burdens after carrying them alone for so long. In those moments, she felt Samuel's presence not as pain, but as peace, as if her late husband's love was quietly blessing her steps forward. Grace's faith deepened during that season. She volunteered at a local support group for widows, offering comfort not from a place of healing completed, but healing in progress. Her vulnerability became her strength, and her story gave others permission to hope again. Daniel supported her without overshadowing her purpose, learning that true love does not rescue, it walks beside. He funded community programs anonymously, choosing humility over recognition, understanding now that impact mattered more than applause. There were nights when memories resurfaced unexpectedly. Daniel would wake from dreams of empty hallways and unanswered phone calls, the weight of his past pressing down on his chest. Grace, too, had evenings when grief arrived unannounced, triggered by a song or a familiar scent. But instead of retreating inward, they learned to sit with those emotions together, trusting that healing was not linear. They prayed together, sometimes in silence, sometimes with trembling words, discovering that God often works most powerfully in quiet spaces. As autumn arrived, Daniel made a decision that surprised even himself. He stepped down from day-to-day leadership of his company, choosing to mentor young leaders instead. The world questioned his choice, but for the first time, he did not need approval. He had found something more valuable than success, purpose rooted in connection. Grace encouraged him, reminding him that life's worth is measured not by titles, but by how deeply we love and serve others. Their relationship grew naturally, grounded in respect and patience. Grace took her time, honoring her heart and her past. Daniel never rushed her, understanding that love built on pressure is not love at all. When the time came, their commitment felt less like a leap and more like a steady step forward. They spoke openly about their fears, their faith, and their hopes, building a foundation strong enough to hold both joy and sorrow. One evening, nearly a year after that first snowy night, they returned to the cafe. The window looked different now, reflecting not loneliness, but warmth. Grace stood beside Daniel, her hand resting gently in his, both of them aware of how far they had come. The cafe owner smiled knowingly, having witnessed countless stories pass through those doors, but sensing that this one was special. Their journey was not a replacement for what was lost, but a continuation of life's story, written with new chapters and deeper meaning. Grace never stopped loving Samuel, she simply learned that love expands rather than divides. Daniel never erased his past, he allowed it to shape him into a man capable of tenderness and faith. Together, they embodied the truth that brokenness does not disqualify us from happiness, it prepares us for it. If this continuation of their journey moved you, reminded you of your own struggles or quiet victories, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach hearts around the world. Before we close, we invite you to comment below and share whether you believe God can turn grief into purpose and loneliness into love. Your words might be the encouragement someone else is praying for. Daniel and Grace's story reminds us that sometimes, the most powerful beginnings happen after life has already broken us. And when two weary hearts meet with honesty, faith, and kindness, Even a simple cafe window can become the place where God quietly changes everything.